So, chapter 6 opens with the Bingley sisters returning a visit to the Bennett sisters. And during this visit, they deem Lizzie and Jane worthy of getting to know better. They liked them. They did not like Mrs. Bennet. They thought her intolerable, and the younger sisters not worth their time. And with Mrs. Bennet, it's such an interesting thing because, like, I don't think I would want to be in a room with her either. Like, if I was in the room, I'd be like, I need to get out of here. But we also, as a reader, have an immense privilege of knowing her a little better than the average person. And there's a reason behind her personality. One of it is pride, which makes her intolerable. She thinks highly of herself and her family and her place in society, and puts on even more airs to give the illusion of being even better than they are. However, she also has this enormous task of figuring out the future in case her husband is to die because of the entail. Like I said, Jane Austen knows from her own life that herself, her sister, and her mother were dependent on their male members of their family. At least when their father had died, they had the male members of their family, but even then, they had no agency. They had no agency, Jane, when her father decided to retire and up and move them to Bath. She was forced to up and move because she was dependent on him. When he died, their brothers then would offer a certain amount, but not a lot amount, to house them and keep them per year, which meant that they lived below probably their previous standard of living. And with Mrs. Bennet having 5 girls and no male figures to be able to do what Jane Austen's father had done, which was give money, she would have to be dependent on either her own brothers, Mrs. Bennet, which may not come to that, and that's a lot to ask with 5 girls in their own families, or for them to marry well. And that's why she's so determined for them to marry well, because she sees her future, and her future is going to be dependent on one of them. Like, that's where she's probably going to end up living when her husband's dead. We then continue with Jane being pleased with the sisters, but Lizzie eyes them warily because she sees the falseness of their manners. And in the previous chapter, it ended with Mary pretty much stating the themes, like thesis statement kind of pride being often confused with vanity. And I think that they actually go hand in hand, that often vanity manifests as pride. And again, every character in this book's pride is going to be wounded and it's going to manifest and cause conflict. But with the Bingley sisters, this is why I'm so sad whenever their like characters are kind of diminished and dwindled down to like one note, because I think they're so interesting in the fact that they represent that their pride is linked to their place in society, and there is no depth to them. There's no depth to the relationship. They're very Faye-like in the sense of like, what do I get out of this relationship? The reason why they're close with Mr. Darcy and like him is not because they genuinely like him deep at his core. They like what he represents and what they can mean for them and their rise in status. And we see it with, again, with the Bennets. While they are interacting with Jane, they don't see her too much of a threat because she's not that high in society, but she's a good girl. Like, Jane is the epitome of what a main character would have been at that time. You know, beautiful, kind, virtuous, everything perfect. And it would be good to have someone like that in your life to reflect well on you, like someone that good likes you. But there's nothing more to that. They don't want a genuine relationship with anyone. There's no depth to it. And that's why I think the Bingley sisters are fascinating, is that like they're so fixated on themselves and their status and how others can either benefit or hinder them. They casually interact with people and be like, all right, we'll be friends, but not really, because it would benefit me. Or if they deem them unbenefitable, they ignore them, as they do with the younger Bennett sisters. The thing that makes Jane Austen unique, especially for her time, is that I believe that she's proposing a balance. She's existing in a world where you're having such polarizing like ideas and theories being proposed. If you go to my YT channel, you see I did a video about the history that Jane Austen wrote during, and I talk about the Enlightenment and Romanticism figures, and you see it reflected with the stories of the time. Like, for example, Pamela and Samuel Richardson's, proposes to be guarded and gentle and quiet and perfect, and it's then being just juxtaposed with the ideas of sensibility, where you should allow your emotions to overcome you and all these things. And that's being suggested, again, Sense and Sensibility is a perfect representation of these two arguments, with Eleanor being very guarded and how that is detrimental to her, and Marianne being too open, having her heart on her sleeve, and how detrimental that is to her. And Jane Austen's obviously this conversation is very important to her because she brings it up again here with Jane, for instance. Jane is too guarded, and look how that might have led to her downfall. That might have caused her to lose out on the love of her life because she was too guarded. And I think Lydia probably could then fit within the sensibility ideas, being a little bit more like Marianne, a little bit too open. And I think Lizzie, though, is not a perfect balance, is closer to the middle where she lets people know for the most part her feelings, but there's still a very civility and guardedness to her. But even then, there's conflict to it. So I think like Jane's just proposing that like no side is the right side. It's good to have a balance, but even then, you're still welcoming potential conflicts into your life. I'm bringing this up, by the way, because Lizzie and Charlotte Lucas has a conversation at the bottom of the first page of chapter 6, where Charlotte Lucas is pretty much saying like to be able to impose on the public in such a case, but it is sometimes a disadvantage to be so very guarded. If a woman conceals her affection with the same skill from the object of it, she may lose the opportunity of fixing him. So this is why I'm having this conversation about sense and sensibility and being open and being guarded. And Jane Austen is kind of like Frances Burney pointing out the hypocrisy of society standards of a woman. Like you should be guarded and not let others know. But at the same time, if you don't let others know, then the guy might get away. But if you let too much emotions show, then like they might run away. Like that kind of like hypocrisy of societal standards on women. So one of the many reasons why Pride and Prejudice out of all Jane Austen's works is still so relevant today and loved today is because it is relevant. It is, you see yourself and your nature that you go through today reflected there. For example, this conversation between Charlotte Lucas and Lizzie of like showing your emotions and how people need encouragement because 9 out of 10 times if they don't know, then they might move on. And everyone has felt that moment of like doubt of like, does that person actually like me or am I like imagining this? And you hesitate if you're going to proceed with pursuing them or not. And sometimes like you realize maybe years later, like, oh, we both liked each other at the same time while we were idiots and didn't know it because we didn't show it. But then you have instances, like I said, where it's too much emotions and you might run away, be like, that is too hard, too fast, too much right there, please. And you also have the case of a little bit more like Charlotte Lucas, where you really don't like the guy, but you kind of need the guy. So you're going to make him think that you like him more than you do. So I like that, like, all these girls in this story are reflecting kind of different styles of relationships, different styles of entering into relationships, of showing your emotions, and they still can be, relevant to today. We still experience these same struggles of like, how much do you show? How little do you show? How guarded are you? How much, how unguarded are you? Do you look for someone because you genuinely want someone, or do you look for someone because you need someone? Like those kind of arguments. So that is why Pride and Prejudice is still so loved and relevant today. Why this stands out more than any of her other stories, because there's a lot, while her other stories have a lot of aspects to it that is relevant to today, this especially I think connects with younger girls, but I think anyone, because anyone can remember that tumultuous time of dating and relationships, and that is exactly what is going on here, of like the heighten of emotions and trying to get the guy or get the girl and all those kind of things. I'm rambling, but does that make sense? Previously, I mentioned how I believe that Jane Austen is using this book to subtly poke fun at the way that courtship is stylized. Not only with my comment about like dancing and how like how do you really get to know someone? Like we've watched the period dramas, you really don't get to talk. And here with Charlotte Lucas, she gets to reiterate it with her saying, but though Bingley and Jane meet tolerably often, which side note, we definitely know canonically that they met at least one other occasion besides assembly. There might be a possibility that they met other times, but there's at least two occasions, which to me that's funny. It's like you met tolerably often two times. But she continues, it is never for many hours together, and as they always see each other in large mixed parties, it is impossible that every moment should be employed in conversing together. Jane should therefore make the most of every half hour in which she can command his attention. When she is secure of him, there will be a leisure for falling in love as much as she chooses. And this is Jane Austen's conversation of how ridiculous this is. You're making a lifelong decision off of someone that you maybe have only danced with and had a few conversations, maybe in a mixed company, which in a mixed company, you do get a sense of a person and how they interact with others, but you sometimes don't get it to the deeper level. You don't really know some other aspects of the person. How can you really know? Like, case in point, Wickham, he is constantly playing a role of flattering and, you know, upping himself more. And I think the cracks start showing the more that Lizzie spends with Wickham privately. But also, this has uncovered something new with Charlotte Lucas for me that I personally didn't acknowledge, but this is normal for my literary analysis. There are characters that I like and I read, but I don't look at them as close as I do when I do an analysis. And this time I'm realizing that Charlotte Lucas's character's intention is to represent what would be kind of considered the normal of that time. For courtships and stuff to work, the young ladies needed to kind of be business-like about it. You needed a plan, a tactic, and you had to go in and execute it. You couldn't waste a single minute because you didn't have many minutes to be able to persuade someone into wanting to marry you. And marriage was more than just love. Love can come after. You needed to figure out where you were going to live, how you were going to survive, you how you might help your family. There are so many other reasons, and that is why Charlotte Lucas does go for Mr. Collins, and it hurts our like modern sensibilities because we want love. That's what we have been striving for, and we don't look as much nowadays at socioeconomic stuff like that. Like that has taken much more of a backseat than it is here. But like, it's so fascinating to have Jane Austen kind of calling to attention what young ladies needed to be like when it came to courtship, and often love needed to go to the wayside or become secondary, and you needed to use your time wisely. That's why you have like the scheme mamas, but like the young ladies themselves needed to channel that energy too. They couldn't go in and just blindly hope that something would happen, which is, again, Jane was teetering on the edge of losing her love if it wasn't for others helping her, because she wasn't, entering courtship in the way that, Charlotte Lucas is, for example. This happens to me way too many times. Even though I've read this book before, I make a comment like, how many times has she actually seen him? And if I read just a little bit more on that same page, I would find out with Lizzie saying that her and Jane and Mr. Bingley had danced 4 dances, saw him one morning at his own house, and dined in his company with him 4 times. This is not quite enough to make her understand his character, is what Lizzie says, which that is a little bit more than I thought it would be. But still, like, they both, Charlotte and Lizzie, are saying, do you really know someone's character after so short of interactions and in mixed parties? Charlotte Lucas continues her argument by saying surely Jane has garnered enough of an idea of Bingley's personality, as much as she would garner if they had interacted for a year. But she also says that sometimes it is better to walk into a marriage knowing little other defects. And Lizzie laughs at that and thinks it's silly. Like, why would you want to do that? But again, we have to remember that Charlotte is 27 to Lizzie's, I believe, 21, 23. Charlotte's been around long enough and is starting to gain on years of the possibility of finding a suitable match diminishing. And like she says, and like Jane Austen experienced herself, you then become a burden on your family and you become uncertain of your future. You don't know what your life is going to look like. Look like even the Bateses and Emma. They deserve their sympathy, not scorn, because of their situation. They can't get themselves out of that situation unless Miss Fairfax marries well and decides to be courteous and help them along the way. They are dependent again on others. And that is what Charlotte Lucas is afraid of. While she does have other siblings, she would then be dependent and wouldn't have as much agency over her life. Even having a terrible husband gives her a little bit more agency and freedom in her life, and wouldn't have to worry about the little things about just a roof over her head. And so I like that Lizzie is still so on the earlier side of entering the marriage scene, that she's still bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, hopeful, thinks that she can, marry for love. Like, she's not ignorant and thinking that she's only going to marry for love. Like, she says, I would marry a rich husband, but she's not as pessimistic as Charlotte Lucas is. And again, Jane Austen has a lot of her characters kind of foiling one another and showing different sides of many different arguments, because I think Jane Austen continuously shows us about balance and shows us about the detriment of every side of an argument, that, whatever decision you make doesn't guarantee happiness or security. It's like Charlotte Lucas says, it's a game of chance when you marry. But you can try to up your chances and making it better, but it's still a game of chance, which, yeah. The situation between Darcy and Lizzie is so fascinating because on page 24 in my copy, we get to a point where while Mr. Darcy had first scarcely allowed Lizzie to be pretty, he had looked at her without admiration at the ball. And when they next met, he looked at her only to criticize, but no sooner had he made it clear to himself and his friends that she had hardly a good feature in her face than he began to find it was rendered uncommonly intelligent by beautiful expression of her dark eyes. And I like what's going on here too, because again, we're going into the first impression, and usually first impressions of people is their beauty. Think of what's going on today with dating apps, with Tinder. You're basing it on looks on first impression. And that doesn't mean anything when you actually interact. So like I love the conversation being had in the story here can be applied to today of we're making a first impression on, looks, and each person has very distinct ideas of what beauty standards should be. So Mr. Darcy is probably judging it by what would be the standards of the upper class, certain features of them. While the Bennett sisters are known beauties of the community, they may not be have features that would fit within an upper class beauty, for example. But the reason why Darcy starts changing his tune is because he starts interacting with her. And sometimes a person's personality makes them more attractive and makes them more beautiful to a person. And that is the downfall of just meeting someone at a ball and having a few dances with them. That is the downfall of, dating apps. We might miss out on someone based off our first impression because our first impression is often on beauty and vanity. We then see that Mr. Darcy starts changing his opinion and wants to interact with her more. And we see also through his actions that he steps towards conversing with her himself, attended to her conversation with others. In doing so, he drew her notice. And at least in my mind, I'm picturing him like kind of on the peripheries, listening to her and kind of want to interact with her. But you can interpret him not going directly up to her as him being shy. Like that is one interpretation we see in some of the adaptations and some people's opinions. But another way you can view it is that he is in a new kind of world, like a new experience. Maybe in his life he's never experienced where he had to go up to someone else, especially someone technically socially beneath him. Typically, they might come up to him. And again, I'm going to bring up Georgette Harris' Sylvester or the Wicked Uncle. I love Georgette Harris, but this is a perfect one kind of parallel, even though that's not her. She has a different book that is her interpretation of Pride and Prejudice, but in Sylvester, he is a duke and he's just known for always being beloved and people coming up to him. And all of a sudden, he has a girl that is slightly beneath him, popping his ego. And I think that is what's happening with Darcy, that all of a sudden he doesn't know how to interact. He doesn't know what is the etiquette, but he wants to interact with her. So I think that's why he's fumbling a little bit here. One could argue that Charlotte Lucas is being kind of a good ring woman, fitting within her ideas of courtship, because she kind of calls over Mr. Darcy as he's hovering into their conversation with Eliza. They banter a little bit. He says with great energy, but it is a subject which always makes a lady energetic. Eliza says, "You're severe on us. It will be her turn soon to be teased," says Charlotte Lucas. "I am going to open the instrument, Eliza, and you know what follows." And that obviously dancing is what follows, but I think to her, she's thinking, great, I'll pave the way for then Darcy to ask Elizabeth to dance, which he scorned her before. Let's see if he'll ask her now. It looks like things could be changing. Maybe that would be good, because to Charlotte Lucas, it would actually be detrimental to Lizzie to allow them to keep talking, because if Lizzie keeps talking in Charlotte Lucas's opinion, they're going to butt heads and they're not going to, pair off. But dancing's good, because that's usually how courtships go, and you can't communicate as much, so you don't know. So you're judging based on a face for the most part and a few passing words, and that might be to Elizabeth's benefit in Charlotte Lucas's opinion. Like she said earlier in the chapter, sometimes it's better to know less when you're walking into a marriage. So yeah, like it's fascinating seeing these polarizing takes, because at the end of it, Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy worked so well because they communicated so much with each other. Yes, a lot of it was butting heads, but eventually they kind of found a common rhythm, if that makes sense. Miss Elizabeth Bennet's comment to Mr. Darcy is very cutting, because she says to him, she turns and gravely glancing at Mr. Darcy, there is a fine old saying which everybody here, of course, is familiar with. Keep your breath to cool your porridge, and I shall keep mine to swell my song. And it's a old saying that, of course, everyone here is familiar with, and it's to remind him that he's the outsider, that she doesn't care about his status. He's not going to get her deference. He is the outsider to their community. And again, that comment is very fascinating in the sense that, like, the ladies aren't traveling. Most of them aren't leaving their communities. So you're either got to find a partner within that said community, someone you grew up with, or hope someone comes into the community that could be a good person to marry. And here Lizzie is scorning not only someone that is a potential suitor, someone new coming in, but a highly desired suitor with all the accolades. I think one of the reasons why Jane Austen's characters have stayed relevant throughout the centuries compared to others of her contemporary, like Pamela and Evelina. Like, many people aren't going to know about those characters unless, like, you deep dive into Jane Austen, like myself and a handful of others who want to know about other books that she would have been reading of her time, or just want more along a similar vein. But those two titular characters are perfect, completely perfect representations of what young ladies are supposed to be: beautiful, kind, generous, hold to their moral standards. And then you get, like, this kind of description of Lizzie from Jane Austen of her performance was pleasing, though by no means capital, which perfectly summarizes that it was fine. It wasn't terrible, but it was fine. She's not an expert. She's not perfection. And we see throughout this book that Lizzie is far from perfection. And it's because of her flaws that make her so much more fascinating. Even though I love Evelina, compared to Lizzie, Evelina is slightly less fascinating of a character in herself, because her flaws is her naivety. And it's not like she has control over that, compared to Lizzie, whose flaws are that her pride and her being kind of closed off sometimes, that she's small town and thinks it's fine. And it's like, it's having a conversation like the small town conversation, which is, as a trope played in stories today, of, like, you think that you know everything in your small town, even though you may want to get out of it, but if someone else makes a comment about your small town, you're like, well, hey, it's not that bad. So Lizzie, like, just that comment, stood out to me, and it makes it very fascinating. It's pretty much showing, like, she's not perfect, but she's real for that. Oh, Mary Bennett. She is one of those characters that I think universally no one quite has the same opinion on. Mutually, we all agree that she is relatively plainer than the others, but there was recently a TikTok I came across where someone said that she was prettier than they expected in the 2005 movie. And it is argued here in the book, like it says here, that she was eagerly succeeded at the instrument by her sister Mary, who, having, in consequence of being the only plain one in the family, worked hard for her knowledge and accomplishments, was always impatient for display. Now, it says the plain one in the family, and I think it's just like, she probably, if she was standing next to someone else, say maybe Charlotte Lucas, she might look relatively pretty, but because her other sisters take a little bit more time than she does and maybe have a few natural beauties, they stand out more. So it's kind of like having a girl in your everyday life. You're like, wow, she's absolutely gorgeous. But then you put her next to, like, say, a model, and you're like, well, maybe not. So it just depends on who they're next to. And also, Mary is such a great character. And I think the reason why a lot of people love her so much and think of her more, like, she's not the forgotten sister. Kitty's the forgotten sister, to be completely honest. We don't talk about her that much. But Mary fits so much into the sibling dynamics, because when you have siblings, especially if you have a lot of the same gender, you're trying to figure out a way to distinguish yourself from the crowd. You might have the sports sister, you might have the musical sister, and you try to find the thing that makes you special, especially when you're young. And for Mary, she decided from probably a young age, I don't have quite the natural grace and beauty of Lizzie and Jane. I'm going to, instead of work to enhance my own natural beauty, I'm going to focus on intellect and accomplishments, which also would have garnered her the love of her father. I think she realized from the beginning she wasn't naturally beautiful, so she probably wasn't getting it from the mother. So she wanted it from the father, and the father is academically inclined. It's unfortunate that it didn't work because, well, she's young. It's so hard because when you're young and you're trying to make accomplishments, you also do want to display it and get praise for it. Think of like all the jokes that people make of like high school musical theater, high school musical theater kids who just randomly break out into song, and it's like just it's cringe, but it's also because they want to showcase the work that they put into it, a skill that they've developed. So it makes sense that Mary tries to seize every opportunity to showcase herself and to stand out from her crowd, because let's also remember her name kind of could have been forgotten if she didn't have something to distinguish her from her sisters, or the Bennett sisters, when they walk into her crowd, the clump of them. So what makes her unique? Well, this makes her unique, even if it kind of doesn't mesh well with the rest of society because of her personality, and her skill is not quite up to where she thinks it is, unfortunately. But that's what makes Mary such a fascinating character, and such a fascinating one to have interspersed through the story, because she's introducing someone that is kind of breaking from norms, but also holding up the moral lessons that need to exist in the story, even though she doesn't fit into that perfect character, main character, like Jane would have been, for example. So I'm rambling, but Mary's just a fascinating character to me. I love her, but like I said, I think Kitty's actually the forgotten sister. She's always linked to Lydia. When Lydia wasn't there, he was really thinking of Kitty. Also, after just reading this line about how Mary had neither genius nor taste, and though vanity had given her application, had given her likewise a like air and conceited manner, and for a second I was like, oh my god, what if she's kind of supposed to parallel a little bit or foil a little bit Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who considers herself a great, officiant and a great lover of music and things. If only she had the talent and things like that. Like her, going on and on. That's very similar to Mary. The difference is that Catherine realized that she didn't have quite the talent. Mary still determined to have the talent, but also Lady Catherine had her title and her position where she can then act in this manner of like, oh, I would have been a great talent, or I have a great ear, and people humor her because of her position in society. Whereas Mary's a random middle sister in a family of, okay, they do well enough, they are landed gentry, so no one's really listening to her. So I think like if Mary had title and wealth, she probably could have been like Catherine de Bourgh in that sense. So Mr. Darcy stands indignantly on the impromptu dance floor, and I think that there are two main reasons why he is against dancing. One is something that I've talked about many times previously, where it he might be someone that abides by how silly it is that you're deciding a marriage, a lifetime commitment with another person to spend your life with that person off of a couple dances. And as we've seen in period dramas, your country dances, you're moving about so fast. You might partner up with someone, but you're not really getting a chance to talk with them. There's not much of an opportunity. You get snippets. And how much can you judge of a person based off how they dance? The other reason is that people put so much weight on dances, because dances are the main form of courtship at this level of society, especially where a mama might see him dancing with their daughter and be like, that means I hear wedding bells. And like, he doesn't want to be caught in that situation. And you see this often in a lot of historical fiction of his time, and, more contemporary. They lean on that trope of like the guys being like, I don't want to dance because I don't want to give the scheming mamas any ideas. So Darcy, I think, already has taken Mrs. Bennet's measure, but also, like, I think he stands against it on principle, probably. Like, he can dance, and he's fine with dancing. He just stands on it against principle because he doesn't want to give people the wrong impression that he's looking for a wife, actively, and also that he doesn't like that style of courtship. That's why he only said that he dances with people that he already is acquainted with, like the Bingleys, because he already has established that it's not going to happen, even though Caroline Bingley definitely believes otherwise. But still, like that, that's why I think he is against the dancing so much. But now that he is pursuing Lizzie, that is why he's now starting to offer to dance with her. This is why I love Jane Austen. She is absolutely brilliant because she digs at people in society, and I believe it probably went over a lot of people's heads, a lot of readers' heads of this time. And you see it also in like her book. She has characters say things that often go over other characters' heads. So I wouldn't be surprised if many people didn't notice her digging at dancing in society when she has, Darcy and Lizzie on the periphery of the dance floor. And Sir William Lucas approaches saying, "What a charming amusement for young people this is, Mr. Darcy. There is nothing like dancing after all. I consider it as one of the first refinements of polished societies." And Darcy responds with, "Certainly, sir. And it has the advantages also of being in vogue amongst the less polished societies of the world. Every savage can dance." And Sir William Lucas, his intention of coming up is to be like, look, we are such a fine society. Like, you should be comfortable amongst us because we are almost equals. Like, we're just like you. And in his defense, they are the top of their particular society and within their community. But, like, it's not like they have a lord within distance to then compare themselves with. So they're the top of a, shorter ladder to say. And the difference, and it's funny, like Mr. Darcy's comments basically saying like the dancing's not that special because anyone can technically dance, even though like technically the dancing styles done at the assemblies in London are very different than like the country dances done at like dance halls in the country. But and that's what like makes them like they try to find little reasons to put themselves above others and make think that they're different and better when it's like down to it you're like it's all just dancing. It's not that special. And it's kind of pointing out like even class is so like ironic that Mr. Darcy's the one that calls out. It's like there's nothing that different between himself and Sir William Lucas. They are technically, I would believe, within the same bracket. It's just that he's a little bit higher. Then you try to find like the smallest things to elevate yourself. And this is what humans do even today. We just differentiate in a different way. Like what makes you slightly better than someone else, but when you actually look at it on like paper, you're like, oh, that's not that special. So that's I love that she's poking fun at this aspect of like people putting too much importance on dancing and also having a character who seems to think higher of himself than the rest of his society calling out pretty much ironically that like dancing like doesn't really make a difference. Anyone can dance. So Sir William Lucas says to Mr. Darcy, and I doubt not that you are an adept in the science yourself, Mr. Darcy, when it comes to dancing. And it's that in the science yourself line that stands out to me because it's like it feels so odd to have science in a line about dancing. And I cannot tell you exactly the meaning of science in this sentence because I'm not entirely sure. I don't specialize in etymology and stuff like that. But I am going to take a stab in the dark based off the context of that era that I do know, and I think it has to do with the Enlightenment and Romanticism thinking. If you go to my YT, if you see the video I made about Jane Austen and the history she wrote during an aspect of the video, I talk about the Enlightenment thinkers and the Romanticism thinkers because Jane Austen was living during that transitional period. The Enlightenment thinkers believed in scientific revolution and reason and like having like everything could be applied with the scientific revolution, whether it's law, politics, governance, life, like things would come down to that. Whereas the Romanticism believed that we should be kind of like looking more at the emotions, that you can't know everything, you can't know the entire universe. That's why you have works such as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein coming out during the Romanticism era. So I wonder if Sir William Lucas is someone of the Enlightenment thinking and sees maybe Mr. Darcy, who's a little bit more reserved, so he wouldn't be abiding by the emotions of the Romanticism or sentimentalism, and thinks him a man of the Enlightenment, a man of reason. And so that's why he is trying to approach him like dancing is a science. Like, you're not dancing for emotion, you're dancing for a reason. There is a order about, there is a process. It's like a animal mating. They do a dance. Like there's a reason you do it. So like I wonder if that is the intention behind his use of science in this sentence. So this is why I think that Sir William Lucas and the Lucas family are within the same vein as the Bingleys. Not only do they have the same background coming from trade and giving themselves now more air and a higher standing in society, but initially Sir William Lucas tries to approach Mr. Darcy and upsell their society currently, like trying to be like, look how grand it is, and then sees it's not working, so he pivots and he says, asked if he has a house in town, and Mr. Darcy bows his head, and Sir William Lucas says, I had once some thoughts of fixing in town myself, for I am fond of superior society, but did not feel quite certain that the air of London would agree with Lady Lucas. Superior society. That he's not wrong. Like the society in London might be superior, inferior to their own, depending on your definition of it. But the fact that he says superior society and he's trying to like step on those around him, it's like a sense of like stepping on those around them, like, well, I'm not like them, I'm more like you. Like, look, I thought about having a house in town. I could have had a house in town, but the air wouldn't have been good for Lady Lucas. I'm just like you compared to the rest of these folk. And you don't know if he's doing it in the intention of helping his daughters, for example, to arrange a better marriage, or if it's his own pride that is causing this. And so, like with Charlotte Lucas, this read through, because I'm reading it with such a intense magnification, such a fine tooth comb, my opinion of Sir William Lucas is changing a lot more, because every other, like, I don't know, a dozen times I've read this story, I never really paid that much attention to Sir William Lucas. But now I think he's absolutely fascinating. And I think he's extra fascinating when you hold him up to the Bingley sisters, when you compare them and contrast them, because they are very similar. So William Lucas kind of reminds me a little bit of Taylor, I believe his name is, from Gilmore Girls. He's the mayor-esque figure of Gilmore Girls, like, in that community. He has a feud with Luke, but he's such a busybody. He, does so many things and thinks highly of himself. And I'm saying that it's like, Sir William Lucas thinking he'll do something gallant and encourage Darcy to dance with Lizzie, and it's like he's acting as though he is the God. There's a term for it, and I'm blanking on it at the top of my head, but it's pretty much like the it's master ceremonies, where like usually they're the people that like introduce and like dictate who's dancing and what order they're dancing. Like he's putting on now that hat kind of thing. And if you want to know more about the master ceremonies, we actually meet a character like that in Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. What Lizzie says when she walks by Sir William Lucas, tries to encourage Mr. Darcy to dance with her, she says, Indeed, sir, I have not the least intention of dancing. I entreat you not to suppose I moved this way in order to beg for a partner. And it's showing us, I think, a great glimpse of what parties were like of this time, where it wasn't like often a casual, like, hey, let's all get together. There was a purpose to it. There was a mission to these kind of parties, whether you were of marrying age or older. The older ones are, getting involved, they're manipulating, they're puppeting, they're pushing, people together kind of things. And Lizzie's comment is pointing out that like others might assume or might have done where they purposely walk by someone in hopes of encouraging a dance partner. That is not her intention. She's just intending to be there to enjoy the company and have a good time. But others might have done that. That would have been other people's intention. There's a precedent for Lizzie to make such a comment, because that's what you would have done, because your intention of, for most people, would be to increase your chances of finding a partner. Like that would be Charlotte Lucas's approach, would be walking by someone in hopes that they would dance with her. It's not walking by just to walk by to enjoy society. So Lizzie is kind of being like, I'm not like other girls kind of energy, but in a way that Darcy is with his comment about dancing, where like they are kind of like rolling their eyes at the way that their society functions. So Lizzie stubbornly holds fast despite Mr. Darcy asking for her hand in vain and Sir William Lucas arguing for this to happen. And then it says her resistance had not injured her with the gentleman, and he was thinking of her with some complacency when thus accosted by Miss Bingley. And I think the reason why he is looking even more highly on Lizzie is that she's not like other girls, if that makes sense. Like she's not fitting, like she's not performing the way that others such as Charlotte Lucas or even Lydia or even Jane would have in that situation. They all would have abided by the etiquette of accepting a dance, the goal of finding a partner. They would have been scheming if there was Charlotte or Lydia or Jane, it would be the etiquette standard. And again, it's also showing the etiquette of like if this was a formal assembly in London, according to like Evelina by Frances Burney rating of her time, it would be rude to turn down someone and then go dance with someone else. That is a whole like conflict at one point in the story. But because it's a country dance, the etiquette is one of those things that is like it's held up like the etiquette, and then other times it's like, oh, the etiquette, like thrown out the window, like whatever. Um, and I think he appreciates that because I think while he does like etiquette, he also doesn't like etiquette. Again, with his dance comment, like I think he does critique their society standards and rules and things like that, even though he ironically upholds them too with his actions. But I think he likes Lizzie because she is ignoring it, but at the same time, still keeping with civility, and also that she's not trying to scheme for him. She's making it very clear, no, I'm fine, pass. And I think that intrigues him even more. He goes, okay, if I pursue that, maybe I would actually get to actually know her. She's not putting on airs to, seduce me. I would actually get to know her as a person because from the get go, she's already like, oh, whatever. You're not that great. I love Caroline Bingley. She is so fascinating to me because she's like one of those, I would say, popular girls who thinks themselves more popular than they are, but also is terrified of losing their place, and they misjudge others. They misinterpret others. She's very fake, as we have already pointed out, but she goes up to Mr. Darcy and says, I can guess the subject of your reverie. And he says, I should imagine not. She responds with, you're considering how insupportable it would be to pass many evenings in this manner, in such society, and indeed I am quite of your opinion. I was never more annoyed. The insipidity, and yet the noise, the nothingness, and yet the self-importance of all these people. What would I give to hear your strictures on them? And love that she's stating her opinion, but trying to mask it as his, be like, look, we're like-minded. And he's like, actually, we're not. She thinks that someone like him would think like this of the society, think down on the society, where she thinks that that's what she needs to do. Again, she's one of those people that you got to step on the others to elevate herself, whereas Darcy's like always had his position, so he doesn't really step on others to like have his place, and so he doesn't really look down on the society, but at the same time, like he doesn't love it, but he doesn't like hate it in the way that Caroline Bingley does. And Caroline is, it's so funny because she interacts like, oh yay, and then meanwhile it's like they're inseparable. They're so insipid and loud. How tedious. And so it's kind of that energy of like gaining up on someone else. Like you find a bond with someone like, oh look, we both hate this person, and it's like actually that other person really doesn't hate that person. They're like, oh, and then it's awkward. But yeah, like Caroline's just fascinating because like she's trying to elevate herself in such a mean way, but it backfires with Darcy. And to make things better, you see her like heckles rise when he like says that he's been thinking about Miss Elizabeth Bennet. She's like, Miss Elizabeth Bennet, I am all astonishment. How long has she been such a favorite? And Barry, when am I to wish you joy? And it's you could tell she's on the defensive and like offended. It's like when you have a crush on someone and they're like, oh, I actually like this person, you're like, ha, so when you're going to get married, it's like you just jump and go to the farthest conclusions to then have them be like, oh, it's not like that, in hopes that they snap out of it, even though it never works like that. But she's hoping that, because we have to remember Caroline is vying for Mr. Darcy. She thinks that she's winning this game, but now Miss Elizabeth Bennet of this insipid society might be higher in the ranks than her, and she is now threatened, which then turns her, the way that she interacts with her then becomes much different going forward than it has been before. Because before, I think she didn't see her or her sisters with competition. I think that is why all of a sudden her and her sister are more willing to push Jane away, because they see them both as a threat now. The chapter ends with Caroline Bingley saying, like, you will have a charming mother-in-law indeed, and of course she will always be at Pemberley with you. He listened to her with perfect indifference. And it's funny to me because it's like it sounds like he's like, oh, he's ignoring her comment, but obviously not. Obviously he internalized that and throws those words practically back at Lizzie during his botched, terrible first proposal. That is something that ingrains itself in his head. So she kind of, it doesn't seem like it worked, her words worked in that moment, but it does in the long, like at least for the long short term, like not long term, but like the long term up to the first proposal, where like her parentage, while he goes, oh, it's fine, I'll ignore it, but obviously it's being his mom, like obviously that is something that annoys him, is her parentage, her mother and her father, as he says in his first proposal. And he tries to be like, it doesn't matter, but it does, because she does care about her family. And so of like persuasion, of how easily someone can kind of get in your head and influence you in that kind of sense and taint things. So yeah, like I think it's fascinating seeing that being portrayed with Caroline in her words, and how that affects Darcy, and then him having to confront those opinions and feelings with Lizzie after she rejects him, and Lizzie also having to confront those feelings that she also has always had, but her pride has been wounded because he brings it like out, he says it out loud finally, kind of thing. So that's obviously a conversation to have at a later point, but it's very interesting, kind of like foreshadowing that is happening at the end of this chapter, where like she makes this comment and he says he listened to her indifferently, like it didn't matter, but obviously it does.